Australia's Labour Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Dyrenforth, and Redbridge's Cos Samaras. Each fortnight, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations with leaders, activists, and thinkers from the world of Australian and global politics, culture, and ideas. Well, hello, everybody. Bonjour. Je m'appelle Nicolas. Nick Dyrenforth. Bienvenue sur Curtin's Cast, le podcast du Centre de recherche John Curtin sur la politique, la gauche et les idées. Comme d'habitude, je suis accompagné de mon ami et expert en sondage, Cos Samaras. Cos, hello, welcome. You can tell that I haven't trotted out much French since my dismal scholarly career in high school, and there's a reason why I didn't do French in VCE, and we've just seen Exhibit A, B, and C. But welcome, Cos. Welcome, listeners, to Curtin's Cast. We are now halfway through the federal election campaign, almost halfway through. Before we get to polls, Cos, and I want to pick your brain, deep dive into the latest polls. We've got News Poll out today, obviously Redbridge over the weekend. We had the campaign launches, a duo of campaign launches yesterday over in Perth. Unusual that they happened on the same day, and I wouldn't mind picking a brain and understanding why that decision was made. But you've got decades worth of campaigning experience, running campaigns at a state level in Victoria and federal level. Campaign launches, do they matter? Do they reach anybody? Why do the parties still do them?
Yeah, if you really want to have an impact in terms of the announcements you're making at those launches, because really they're what they are, platforms for that. You really don't want normal punters watching it, right? Because they look a bit religious, a bit cultish, right? Yeah,
this is the thing. As I remind people who are members of political parties make up about 0.01% of the Australian population.
Yeah.
We are not like the rest of the population, and we never really have been.
No.
Political parties have dwindled over the past few decades, but people who join political parties have never been like most Australians who are too busy working, looking after their families, watching the footy, going to the opera, whatever they're doing, they're not joining political parties. And they're certainly not watching campaign launches.
And they're certainly not sit there or in a hall either in Western Sydney or in Perth, listening to religious type speeches.
I don't blame them.
Yeah.
Religious types. So I did see an observation made yesterday. Why were they held on the same day? It's quite unusual. And there was a comment, I think, there was a piece of commentary today suggesting that every day that questioning the decision to have them on the same day, and that Peter Dutton, it was kind of like a 0-0 draw in soccer or football, depending on terminology. And every day that there's a 0-0 draw is actually a win for Team Elbow and Labor, because Peter Dutton's not getting his message across.
Yeah, it's a strange one, right? I mean, what do you regard as a win? Basically, Labor's primary vote really hasn't moved greatly in the last 8 weeks. Right? This talk that Labor's got this momentum going. The only momentum that's going on here is people moving from the coalition pole to minor parties. Yeah, there's some votes that Labor's picking up here and there, and they're stabilising their primary vote in some electorates. But overall, nationwide, we're not seeing a massive surge to Labor here, right? Labor was successful in stabilising its primary vote. It had a lot of problems with its primary vote over the last 18 months. It's brought them back, as we've touched on before in previous podcasts. And it's been relatively stable, 32, 33, in that space. So what do these campaign launches do? Well, basically, it's probably more important for the coalition than it is for the Labor side of politics.
Yeah.
They obviously had a housing announcement yesterday. they need to address those wounds they have on their right flank that keep bleeding into right-wing minor parties, because that is fundamentally hurting them. Because as we know, once you lose a certain group of votes, you don't get them all back through preferences.
And so where are they, just to be clear for listeners, they're bleeding primaries to One Nation, to Clive Palmer's latest outfit,
right.
the trumpet of patriots.
Yep. Independents and
Libertarians.
Yeah.
Liberal Democrats.
Yep. Well,
but every little percentage counts, doesn't it?
Well, look, and fundamentally the reason why they're losing votes here is because the coalition has not been successful in sending a very strong message to these voters that they've got an economic plan for this country's future that aligns with these voters' values, which are not left-wing, right? It's fundamentally, and overwhelmingly,
they're not ideological. They're not left-wing. They're not right.
You could say they're conservative. I mean, they must have conservative values in place.
Not big C conservative. They're kind of small C conservative.
Yeah. But they're also overwhelmingly under the age of 50.
Yeah.
Right? So we're still dealing with millennial Gen Z who sit on the coalition. And there are, yes, people of those generations that do vote conservative. But again, they will probably be more animated around some of the issues around housing and economic, problems within their community and their family. So these are the people that Darwin's got a problem with. They're only in the outer suburbs and regions, but they're also in very significant numbers in the inner parts of our cities, right? Yeah. So what's going also here is the coalition primary dropping to minor parties in the outer suburbs and regions? Or are we really seeing an exponential decline of their support in inner urban parts of our large cities? I think the latter is applying here.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a sting in the tail here when it comes to, for those who are on the Labor side of politics. I'd just be very cautious about getting a bit getting excited.
Reading
around,
too much into the commentary.
Right,
there is a lot of chatter about a surge.
Yeah,
but you're right.
Amongst
Gen Y, the millennials, Gen Z, and a good chunk of Gen X. I contributed some comments to the Australian over the weekend and was talking about the fact that Gen X is actually a bit schizophrenic. The older half of Gen X have got a lot more in common with the boomers, and the younger half of Gen X are actually, people like me who imagine they're millennials, but actually we do have a lot more in common with millennials. And I kind of
depends where you are.
Explaining it, I kind of it depends where you are, and I think particularly in Victoria it matters. My kind of dividing line is, how old were you when the early 1990s recession happened? Do you remember? Do you remember your parents getting thrown out? But particularly your dad,
Mm-hmm.
He was working in manufacturing, blue collar job, and lost his job in the early 90s recession, but potentially didn't get it back. So the people who recall or remember that, and who weren't impacted by the early 90s recession, I think there's a real big sort of internal dividing line there amongst Gen Xers.
Yeah, look, I think there are stronger ones that divide Gen Xers, and that is if you're Gen Xer in your 50s and you're still renting, you're going to be voting very much like a millennial or Gen Z, right? And there are many of them in that space. So I think it really also depends on your economic personal circumstances and your housing circumstances as well.
Yeah. Class matters.
Yeah.
Demography matters. Demography is destiny. Where you live matters. But digging deep into the polls, you've touched on, Newspoll has the 2PP, understanding that we shouldn't read too much into the national 2PP anymore, 52-48 to Labor, and importantly with the coalition primary down to 35, down 1. I want you to let's dig deep into your Redbridge 20-seat, marginal seat tracker, which you published over the weekend in the News Corp tabloids. Pretty similar to Newspoll, 52.5 to 47.5 lead. Now, you've talked about there not being a big switch on, but that's a 3-point gain for Labor since your late Feb.
7%
polls.
decline in the coalition primary since
Yeah, that's the big
first
one,
wave,
isn't it?
right?
Yeah.
And largely most of that's gone to minor parties.
Yeah, so you've got the others on 17%.
That's right.
Up 4
Yes,
points.
correct.
And the Greens are steady. And as I said, Labor's only up 1
That's right.
to 35.
Yeah.
So
and these are contested seats, right? So you're going to see a lot more of a concentrated contest. The major party brand will be represented far more prominently in advertising, in direct voter contact, right? So these seats are getting the full bench press by both major parties. So we will see a lot more, I would say, strength in the primary votes for both majors in those seats.
Yeah, because of course we don't have the Teals running in those kind of seats.
That's right. We're not testing them.
Yeah,
because we're only looking at what is going on in the main contest. There are obviously a whole range of other contests underway. So there are obviously Teal versus Coalition. There are Independent versus Labor. There are Greens versus Labor contests underway, and Independent versus Coalition as well. So not Teal, but other independents. There's a whole range of other skirmishes going on, but we're only testing the main one at the moment.
Great. Key seats. So we talked in the last few episodes, we've talked about seats to watch. Are there any new ones on your radar? There's a few that I really want to pick your brain about. You told me not to talk about Leichhardt in North Queensland. You think it's a little bit of a furphy that this is in play? This is Warren Inch's
unless what we saw at the state election in Cairns, repeats itself up and down the entire upmost northern coast of Queensland, sure. But we don't see that being the case.
Sticking in Queensland, Brisbane we've spoken about previously.
Yep.
How's that tracking?
Yeah, so Brisbane federal electorate, not necessarily Brisbane the city.
Yep.
Right. So it was narrowly won by the Greens at the last election. It probably has the most lowest of all, I'll say, of all their federal MPs, one with the lowest profile there. And I'd say that it's either
Tell us who the member is.
So it's either going to be picked up by the Coalition, or the Labor Party. So, it's one of those contests where we're just going to have to wait and see. Look, the Greens, and I will make this point, the Greens primary across the board seems to be quite healthy. And doesn't surprise me, because although they have had problems at state elections and local government elections, it appears the federal elections do animate their base a lot more than other contests do. So
Stephen Bates is the Greens federal member for Brisbane. Even I had to look that up because he really is
very low key.
Very low key, and he's under the radar. He's more than under the radar. It's almost like he's on the bottom of the ocean. Let's work our way down south geographically. Benlong, in a North Shore, Sydney. How is Benlong? This used to be a blue ribbon Liberal seat. Was held by John Howard for 3 decades plus.
His entire career.
3 decades plus. And he lost that seat, of course,
he did.
in the 2007 election.
Yes.
And people, Labor people were rubbing their hands in glee, delighted in that result. But it was also a reflection of the changing demographics in that seat, wasn't it? So how's Benelong shaping up in 2025?
I think it's still too close to call.
Yeah.
It's a seat that the Coalition should be winning comfortably, and it's not going to be doing that. So I would say that right now you still put your money on the Coalition picking it up, but it's closer than it was, I would say, 8 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving south again, Chisholm. Do you want to explain Chisholm to our listeners? Chisholm is middle outer suburbs of Melbourne's east.
Yeah, university electorate's got obviously Monash University campus there.
Yeah.
It's
held by Labor's Karina Garland.
Yeah, that's right. And it's post redistribution, Labor's primaries at 34, coalition at 39. That's a problem for the Labor Party because what we do know in Victoria is Labor is largely getting a 6 to 8% swing against it on two-party preferred. And it's losing a significant chunk of its primary vote, not all to the coalition, but in a seat like that where you already are starting from behind, and if you drop into the low 30s and high 20s as the Labor Party, you're done. So I think that
this is a seat with a very large Chinese Australian.
That's right.
Ethnic background, which I think is a topic we could discuss as a standalone podcast episode of Curtin's Cast, because I think that the coalition have adjusted their pitch because the bellicosity of Scott Morrison's anti-China rhetoric was a big vote loser in 2022, wasn't it?
The other thing about Chisholm, and there's a number of electorates around the country which they have higher numbers of millennial Gen Z present, right? So this is a demographic that the coalition really struggles with. I wouldn't say that Labor dominates it. It wins the two-party preferred vote, as that's no question about that, up to 60%, right? But it's really bad territory for the coalition. And if the coalition doesn't address this in terms of appealing to these generations, they could be in a real spot of bother in years to come. Because at the moment, nationwide, they're about 42% combined. In electorates like Chisholm, they're closer to 50.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're not doing well with them, you're already started beyond the 8 ball.
And this was a big conversation. This was a big part of the conversation in the wash-up from the last election, 2022, and it seems like they really haven't done any serious work to address
this. If you
this.
look at even when Labor was doing really badly in the federal polls, where the coalition was edging in front, if you looked at the age demographics, it was still pretty good for Labor amongst younger voters. So it's, younger voters are also most inclined to be voting for minor parties, right? So I think I expect about 5 million Australians to vote for minor parties at this election. And, a very significant number of them will be under the age of 45.
Yeah, who, as you've explained previously, they don't have that emotional and cultural loyalty and brand loyalty to the majors. So Chisholm too close to call at this stage.
Oh, no, I'll put Chisholm as a coalition game.
Oh, well, okay. Yeah. You put your money where your mouth is.
Yep.
Victoria overall, though, how is Victoria shaping up for Labor? Are we still looking at a kind of 1990 redux, or it's not as you talked about the professionals coming, entering the campaign. It seems like things have. It's not going to be a great result for Labor. But you were talking about, on a good day it loses 3 seats, on a bad day it loses 6 seats. Where is Labor up to?
Sitting on a good day.
A good day.
Yeah, but I wouldn't exactly define it as a good day. They could lose 3 federal seats to the coalition, and then 2 to the Greens. So it's federal seat of McNamara and Wells. I wouldn't rule out the Greens winning those electorates.
Yeah. We've spoken previously about McNamara and not a 3-quarter contest, really a 2-quarter contest between Labor and the Greens. And I live in the seat of McNamara. I can tell you it's a feisty contest at the moment.
Yeah.
I was going to move to South Australia, but actually we always ignore Tasmania. We always ignore poor old Tassie, the Apple Isle. Tasmania, 5 federal seats. How are they holding up?
I would say the seat to watch is Lions, as to whether Labor can defend that. Rebecca White is, the endorsed candidate, former opposition leader.
Yeah. So 2 or 3 losses she led the Labor Party to.
3, I think, from
memory.
memory.
I think it's 3, which is a very unusual thing to do these days.
But she has a really good name rec in the area
as
a result of her being the incumbent state MP in that part of the world. I would say that Lions is 1. There's independent running in Franklin against the federal Labor government's policy on salmon.
Yeah.
Farming.
Is this an anti-salmon?
Anti-salmon.
Or pro-salmon?
Yes.
Independent. Anti-salmon.
I think it's anti.
So effectively, would we call this person a kind of teal-style candidate?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So part of that kind of middle class, progressive, knowledge class, post material.
Yes. Bass and Braddon, I mean, at the moment, the coalition should hold them, but I mean, with Braddon, who knows, right? It's one of those seats that has historically been moving away from Labor. The demographics are really poor for Labor in central northern Tasmania, and nothing's really changing there. So that's the quick snapshot of Tassie.
South Australia, again, we haven't spoken about South Australia much.
I'll keep an eye on.
Back to Tassie. Back to Tassie. Jackie Lambie. How will Jackie Lambie?
She's the least unpopular MP. I know there was some coverage around she was the most popular politician, but the best way I can define it, she's the least unpopular because she's still in the negative area, or just positive by a fraction out of all the federal politicians that we tested. So she's still got a very good, strong brand there. I think she'll comfortably get re-elected in the Senate.
Yeah. South Australia. About moving to South Australia, they've just had Gav around there. I've had an AFL feast this week in between. It's been Jewish Passover, Pesach, and I don't need to eat for another week. And I watched a lot of footy, seen Peter Malinowskis's beaming smile all across the TV networks. How is South Australia holding up? Will Labor bask in the glow of Peter Malinowskis? King Pete, the king of South Australia.
Yeah. 2 federal seats, Boothby and Sturt. I think Boothby will be defended quite comfortably, and I'll be watching Sturt on the night. Sturt is something that probably the coalition weren't looking at as a seat they've got to worry about. If I was them, they should worry about it. It's in the top 20 of all federal electorates when it comes to the number of Commonwealth public servants.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. Pretty bad policy.
This is why you're on Curtin's Cast.
Yes.
For those incredible and perhaps eccentric pieces of data.
So if you've got thousands of people that either work directly in the Commonwealth Public Service or have a family member that does,
they got the number 41,000 imprinted in their brains.
And you've got a party that is basically taking to the ballot box a policy to sack many of them.
Or compel them to not to work from home.
Well, they ditched that now.
Yes.
Then, you probably should be, if you've got a seat that is in the top 20, you should be worried if you're a coalition. Yeah. And Sturt is one of them.
One of the craziest policy manoeuvres, and then an extraordinary backflips. One of the most extraordinary backflips I've seen during.
It's crazy
during
because you have an electorate that is incredibly bruised, suffering through an inflationary crisis, looking for hope, right? Looking for hope and inspiration. They were at the time unhappy with the Labor government. They're looking for an alternative. And he's turned up and farmed negativity to them, that he's going to sack people and force people back to work 5 days a week in the office. Now, okay, it only applied to public servants, but when he uttered the sentence that he's going to ask public servants to go back to work 5 days a week, private sector workers didn't hear the Commonwealth public sector side of it, right?
Correct.
They just heard that's his idea and it applies to me as well. And the one thing he missed completely there is just how important that work-life arrangement is for women.
Yeah.
Particularly in the outer suburbs, right? And of course, you now see them. They've completely dumped the policy because it was pretty clear it was coming up on all their door knocking and all their surveying and polling. But I would say this is whoever dreamt that policy up
should never work
in politics ever again.
Ever. And here's a simple way of explaining the residents. So it's not just the public servants potentially impacted by those policies. They have families. They have
families.
They have children.
Yep.
Now, for instance, so there's a 50-year-old female public servant. Okay, her husband might work in the private sector, but he hears and sees that policy being proposed.
He's gone.
That the sons and daughters of that female public servant, they might work in the private sector. They might be at university. They feel they understand viscerally. They get that.
Yep.
There's a target on their mum's back.
Is it the problem some people in politics make? The problem with
They live in a world of abstractions, cause they live in a world
it's
of
just
abstractions in a bubble.
And it's like, I mean, at what point are they going to go out and speak to Australians and find out what people really think about public servants? And, particularly when we're talking about the millennial Gen Z, they don't want people sacked. Because, of course, their response was, if they weren't personally impacted by it, that means it's going to cut services.
Correct.
Right? So
I had a conversation with Prue Goward on the drum with Patricia Cavalis, PK. Hi, PK, if you're listening. And I mentioned the 41,000 job cuts. This is before the Nadia Comaneci style backflip. And Prue was talking about efficiency. What about efficiency? There are too many public servants. I simply said to Prue, Australians, working middle-class Australians, need to call Centrelink. Centrelink is not just about ringing up to collect your dole. We're all now moved through Centrelink. Now, if you can't get through to Centrelink because there's no one there to pick up the phone or help you, there's a problem. There's a problem. So big ideological and cultural problem there for the coalition. Moving along as we circumnavigate the continent, Western Australia. Bullwinkle. Bullwinkle has been not just mentioned in dispatches, but it's one of the seats to watch. Nominally coalition.
Yeah, and it should be a pickup on the night.
Explain the seat of Bullwinkle, by the way.
Yeah, it's peri-urban. It's basically situated on, I would say, there's a part of the electorate that basically sits on the eastern part of Perth, out of urban areas, takes in seats like Kalamanda and state seats and so on. And then there's a big regional component to it, hence the National Party standing there as well. So you have a three-pronged contest there, Liberal, National Party and Labor obviously contesting it. It should be won by the coalition on paper. I think this is where the Keep the Sheep campaign will work the best as well. For those who don't know, this is a campaign that's been run to force the federal Labor government to overturn its ban of live sheep exports. And it resonates in parts of Western Australia because that's where most of the industry impact is going to occur. So I expect that seat to go to the coalition, but we are looking at a coalition primary that continues to suffer erosion.
Excellent. We are going to circumnavigate the whole continent, but we're leaving out the ACT because I don't think anything's going to happen in the ACT. In Northern Territory, we're going to mention Northern Territory for the first time. The seat of Solomon, held by Luke Gosling. It too is a big public servant, public sector seat.
Yeah, I don't think anything's going to happen in the seat of Solomon.
You think a Labor hold?
Yes.
Excellent. So
not if you're on the coalition side.
Coming back to the overall national result, are you still holding to a minority Labor government as the most likely outcome? There is lots of talk now, again, mainly driven by the commentariat. We're not all bad, the commentariat, but that there's a possibility of a slim possibility of a Labor majority government. You still think minority is the most probable outcome?
Most probable outcome. Yes. I wouldn't rule out majority, but again, now we're entering into part of the campaign where majority Labor is possible if all the planets align for Labor, right? So one, that stabilisation of their primary vote is universal. Two, they are able to encourage voters in Victoria not to think about the Victorian Labor government when they are voting, and to think about Dutton instead. And that may help them in a lot of seats, but for example, the federal seat of Hawke, which is always on everyone's watch list. But I think Labor will get an absolute haircut there, but the vote's going to spray.
Yeah.
Think about millennial and Gen Z.
Very similar to the state seat of Werribee.
State seat of Werribee, we're going to see this across the country, right? Where when one major party loses a bucket of votes, those votes spray. Now, the other side does pick some of them up, but not all of them. And then obviously the preferential system, depending on how bad your hemorrhaging is, could cost you the seat. I think in Hawke's case, Labor can afford to lose a bucket load of votes. And
can't afford, yes.
Can't
afford to lose a bucket load of seats.
That's right. Bucket load of votes. But because the coalition's primary is so low and in the 20s at the moment, they won't be able to capitalise on that hemorrhaging. And so I think Sam Ray should be okay on paper, right? That dynamic's going to repeat itself across Victoria.
But one of the key things, as you pointed out previously, that's even in play means that Labor has to divert resources.
Oh, they are. They're fully funding it. That's right.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
And for those who are listening, Labor doesn't mess around when it comes to which seats they are resourcing. If a seat's not getting resourced, that means it's not in danger. Right? And one thing I would say about the Labor campaign machine, and it's not me saying it because I come from that side, it is a much better machine than the coalition.
Yeah,
and has been for
neutral
a long time.
observers have been saying this for a long time. There's a big problem for the coalition in Victoria. So let's say there's not good people, it's not switched on people, but there seems to be a problem with their campaign machinery.
Well, it's the art of running a campaign, and you can see how Paul Erickson at a federal level has locked in Labor into a very disciplined, focused campaign.
Been exceptionally disciplined.
You can tell when he took control of the campaign.
There haven't been many gaffes. Albo partially falling off the stage is about as bad as it's got for the ALP. Albo has been match fit. He's been sharp. He's 100%. Been switched on.
Yes.
He's running a much better campaign in 2022. What's gone wrong for the coalition then, Cos? We could talk about yesterday. Saturday we saw Dutton out there in Perth with Jacinta Price.
I wouldn't dismiss that. I think what she's doing, she's clearly popular with some of their base, and guess which ones they're losing.
I should say to listeners who were living under a rock over the weekend, she talked about making Australia great again. She may as well have been wearing a red MAGA hat.
But it may indeed be appealing to the people that they're losing to their right flank. I would say that it probably is, right? So rolling her out is not exactly crazy. Even if she says that, I wouldn't say, the commentary gets excited about it, but remember, the biggest problem the coalition now faces is it's bleeding to its right flank. Her in that space, campaigning next to Dutton, is not going to hurt them. It's going to actually help them.
Interesting. A contrarian view.
That's right.
Contrarian view. But, it's not going well. And even...
Well, because their campaign machine is just not fit, ready. They've not done the work. They've clearly not done the policy work.
The policy offerings, let's have a look at the housing. The coalition, we're going to pay the interest. We're going to pay the interest on mortgages for a select number of Australians. Is such a bad policy, such a bad policy that even Donald Trump killed it off after 2017 in the US. Okay, it is. I cannot begin to tell you, my head is buried in my hands. It won't fix the problem, okay? We've got a problem with, house prices are exorbitant and we're not building enough houses. Yeah, it is a demand subsidy. It is a demand subsidy. It will push up prices. It will not result in any new builds. It will, and by the way, number two, it will reduce our tax base. And at the same time as the Liberals are saying, we're not going to support Labor's tax cuts, and it's regressive. It's regressive. Some people actually care about regressive.
Let me ask you some questions here. So where do you think are the largest number of voters who rent and cannot save enough for a deposit to buy their first home? Where do they live?
Inner cities.
Inner city. Where is the largest number of people?
With this.
That's right. Where are the largest number of people who are growing up with their parents in outer suburbs and want to live in that suburb? Of course, it's these greenfield areas, right? Are they going to struggle finding deposit? Well, contrary to popular belief, homes in outer suburbs of Melbourne in particular are much cheaper than they are in the inner suburbs, right? The problem we have with the political class, particularly the Labor side of politics, is that every time they talk about there's a housing problem and we can't get young people into homes, they've got an image of a person that lives in the inner and middle urban parts of our country. They don't think about the Indian Australian the parents who actually want to buy the home for their kids, which is a custom and practice, right? And which they will. So this is great policy, right? So you're going to think about, I think both policies work for both camps. So if you're in the business of trying to win Bennelong, Labor's policy, great, right? Work like a chump. Parramatta, perfect, right? If you're on the coalition side and you're wanting to win a seat like McEwen, perfect, right? Again, out of suburban, these are the sort of policies that resonate. So I think both are strategically smart, right? Both are strategically smart, and voters won't believe a second the rhetoric around it's going to drive prices up, because the lived experience of someone that lives in out of suburban Sydney or Melbourne is, it's expensive, but it's not crazy like further in town.
Yeah.
Right. I can still buy a house. It's just that I can buy it because the people who are renting in, I'm going to go back to Melbourne as a geographic location, renting in Coburg and Brunswick, don't want to live out here with me.
Yeah.
Right. In Pakenham, right, or in Craigieburn. They want to live where they feel comfortable with their community, and that's fine. But they're never going to be able to buy a home there.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Labor's policy is perfect, and the fact is that the government hasn't built enough houses, and both sides don't want to talk about the elephant in the room, and that is the fact that no one's saying that house prices should fall, but house prices need to fall in relative terms compared to incomes. That is, if you look over the last three and a half decades, that is, or 2.5 decades really, that is the measure which means the most. What proportion of people's income do they need to spend to buy and to service a mortgage?
It's pretty hard. It's a scrambled
egg. The ratio
has
gone.
It's
completely out of whack.
15 times your annual salary. That's right. Yeah. The problem you got there is you have millions of people with mortgages right now that are bought at the top of the market. If you're going to be running out there and saying that prices need to come down, that's wiping out people's equity.
Yeah.
And that's, if you go to a seat like Werriwa in Sydney's outer western suburbs, where over 50% actually have a mortgage, that's a message that will guarantee you lose that seat.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, we're talking about this in public policy terms.
That's right,
But this has been a really bad campaign from the Libs, and one of the reasons I saw you had some comments for Peter Harcher in his column in Nine Media, The Age, Sydney Morning Herald over the weekend, and you were onto this in the opening episodes of Curtin's cast. It was all too little, too late, and they are still running. The Libs are still running ads, TV, online, seeking to humanise Peter Dutton, which tells you everything.
Or to start 6 months ago.
Humanise him.
6 months ago.
Or a year ago.
Yeah, a year ago even.
Or as soon as the voice, they really did misread the voice, didn't they?
So Daniel Andrews, is well known by everyone now, but back in 2013, he was an unknown.
Correctamundo.
And we ran a 6 month to 8 month campaign because it was about making sure when you have an undefined leader, and Dutton was that, putting aside everyone that is interested in politics, they know who he is. Most punters didn't. It's a blank canvas. So the race was who was going to fill that canvas in first, the Labor camp and the unions, or the coalition. The problem for the coalition is it's been filled in because Labor got there first. They've painted the painting, and it's not a picture that the coalition likes. It's too late now.
Yeah, you cannot fatten a political pig on a market day.
Correct.
Is this the worst federal Liberal campaign you've seen in your lifetime? I'm thinking it's there in the top 4. I think 1993 we had Dr. John Huston and the GST, and him appearing in cake shops talking about how the GST would apply differently to the candles on the cake, the icing on the cake inside the cake. It was a cluster. Beep. I think 2022 was bad, although the Liberals could have lost by a lot more.
Well,
It wasn't a Labor landslide. It wasn't a Labor landslide. And I also put 2016 for the Libs in one of the worst in my lifetime. You know, we had Malcolm Turnbull out there with his exciting times talking about, you know, you have to be agile, and it was a shocker. But this is right up there.
But,
Where would you rank it?
It's pretty bad. It's bad because all the other campaigns you mentioned, you could probably find a theme in them. So, you know, most voters out there, they don't really pay attention to the campaign. They just listen to the dim sound of it. And all you need voters to do is pick up a theme. GST 1993, yeah, it was pretty clear what Houston was running on, Fight Back, right? There was a theme to his campaign. There was a marketing, planned out, researched approach. The problem with this campaign is I'm following and I can't tell you what it is, right? And that tells me the research has not been done. All the research was wrong. It's clearly some of the policy announcements.
The slogan too, Cos, get Australia back on track. But it seems like, I can
see where that came from.
I can see where they're coming from, but it's almost like it was dreamt up a year ago or 6 months ago, and we've started to see some rays of economic sunshine. I know how much people are struggling out there still, but I don't think it grabs people in the same way. And also, to come back to that point we've been hammering, hope. I'm just not sure it offers people any hope.
Well, you're not bringing Australia back to where it used to be by sacking people and forcing people to work back to the office 5 days a week. This is fundamentally the problem, right? Which is on the alternative, I'm going to offer you a better future. Oh, by the way, before we start that conversation, I want to tell you about how I'm going to sack some people and force, you know, the entire workforce, predominantly female workforce, back to the office 5 days a week. And even though that was only being applied to core public servants, as we touched on before, that's not what people heard. So clearly that wasn't researched, because it took us, Redbridge, one survey to prove that was an absolute nuclear bomb, right? So I don't know who's doing their research, but it's pretty bad.
How bad a result for the Libs would result in Peter Dutton potentially losing his job? We're assuming that you know, they're not going to be able to form a minority government after the election. What's a pass result for Peter Dutton?
It's pretty difficult because the expectations have been raised.
Yes.
Right? And so anything now lower than the expectation is going to be pretty hard for him, although it is the LNP, it isn't the coalition, right? 3/4 of the caucus is made up of MPs from Queensland.
Correct.
Right? So, I don't know. That's something we'll have to wait and see.
And I'll give you a little piece of trivia on the way out, Cos. This is a history-making election potentially for Labor and for Albo. There's been a lot of commentary around that he's potentially the first Prime Minister to win re-election since John Howard, and then to serve a second term, full or otherwise. He will be, if he wins, he will be the third Labor leader after Gough Whitlam and Bob Hawke to take Labor out of opposition into government and win re-election.
That's right.
So,
well, he's going to do that.
For all the heartache and some of the troubles of this term, he becomes Labor royalty. If he can pull this off, minority or majority, I think he's up there with.
If I was on the Labor side of politics, I would go, yep, take the win, but do not ignore the lessons that we are seeing across the electorate.
And we are going to dig deep into those lessons, but that's on a future episode of Curtin's Cast. But that's all for now. Thank you very much to the listeners. Please give us a like or subscribe across Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. You can find all those links at curtinrc.org. Next week, we've got a very interesting, sensational guest all the way from the US, from Atlanta, Georgia, we've got Drew Weston, who's an American political psychologist, and author of The Political Brain, one of the Bibles of American modern political thought. But for now, it's au revoir. Goodbye.